Thank you for joining me, and thank you so much for being here. This time we are suiting up and blasting straight into Marvel's Phase 2, the stretch from Iron Man 3 to Ant-Man, plus the two Marvel one-shots in between. It's a phase full of big swings and even bigger consequences, and some of the MCU's weirdest tonal choices. From political thrillers to space operas to tiny, tiny heists. Phase 2 tried to grow up and sometimes it tripped over its own cape, so let's dive into that. Starting with Iron Man 3 from 2013. The first MCU movie in a post-Avengers world had a weird amount of pressure to live up to, especially after what thought was a bit of a misfire with Iron Man 2. Iron Man 3, though, tries to both deepen its characters while reorganizing the seeds, its priors left behind to better suit this narrative over really planting seeds itself for the future, if that makes sense. Dealing with an unhealthy helping of PTSD, Tony, the titular Iron Man, in his infinite wisdom, pisses off an international terrorist who proceeds to wreck shop. The President and War Machine are also involved, as they usually are, but clearly the crux of this plot is Tony dealing with a problem he very explicitly invited to his house and ultimately putting it right. Where Iron Man 3 tries to distinguish itself by doing its best to subvert its audience's expectations at every moment it is able, I would argue it does this maybe one too many times to be as effective as it would like to be, but I would be lying if I said I saw any of the twists coming when I initially saw this in theaters. Iron Man 3 in large part feels like empty calories story-wise, but it is as fun and witty and action-packed as what came before, with a little more depth in its characters than the standard Marvel fare maybe. And Agent Carter, the Marvel one-shot that came out with Iron Man 3. Yeah, I can understand why this specifically was picked up for a full series. Haley Atwell is genuinely perfect in the role of a fully capable lumberjill-esque figure being shat on by the misogyny of the 1940s. There is a secret agent mission the man doesn't want her to take, so she takes it anyway because, yeah, fuck the man. This feels like a perfect little continuation from Captain America the First Avenger, and I wish I'd watched it a little sooner, honestly. This is my first time getting to it. And then we're at Thor the Dark World, also from 2013. And I will concede there are probably worse MCU movies out there at this point, but this is still the one I am least excited to ever put on, right up there with Iron Man 2. For everything this movie does right, from solid camera work and great visual design, there is a big thing that takes me out of the same elements. Whether it being the ether feeling like a Windows screensaver or the really contrived reasoning that the romance has to start from scratch again. All this mixed with a relentlessly drab color palette has me wanting to turn on an arguably less polished but more fun movie in this franchise. And a dark army of space elves should be the perfect antagonist for Thor in terms of upping the stakes in the conflict. But Thor, for me, really shines in the character interactions we are mostly robbed of by having Thor and the big bad Malekith so distant throughout. Plus, the second or third bait-and-switch Loki death is made worse to chew on with each seeming subsequent death. This probably won't be, but very well may be the last time I put this particular movie on if I can help it. There is just not enough in the grander scheme to have me wanting to come back to this particular science fantasy action adventure outside of wanting to for the sake of thoroughness anymore. All Hail the King from 2015, the Marvel one-shot that was released with the Thor Blu-ray, I believe. I really wish one-shots would come back, though, because they have only gotten better as they went on, although I suppose they still are alive in specials like Werewolf by Night and the Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special. All Hail the King is hilarious, following the fake Mandarin from Iron Man 3 in prison essentially managing to fail forward even where he is, framing around an agent for the actual Mandarin we will see way down the line in Shang-Chi, interviewing Ben Kingsley's Mandarin for a fun little prison breakout. It's really great stuff. Captain America the Winter Soldier from 2014. Man, for a while, the MCU had quite possibly one of the worst reputations regarding its sequels. Then The Winter Soldier came along. It gives us a narrative that works uniquely well with Captain America without raising questions as to where the rest of the Avengers are, mixed with some well-written dialogue performed as well as any of the best political thrillers, and you get what stands as the best movie in the entirety of the MCU's 35 features for many to this day. All of the awesome storytelling is highlighted by some of the best stunt and fight choreography that we have seen in the franchise. This Steve Rogers is tactical and starts every fight wanting to finish it quick. And that translates to the character throughout the entire story. That characteristic that is attributed to everyone in the movie, from the titular Soldier of Winter to Nick Fury or Natasha, we rarely in any movie see characters land so well in communicating every aspect of their personality. Personally, I do wish we had held off on using Bucky and the Winter Soldier for one more Captain America movie, just so we could marinate on the character missing for a little while longer, but I understand why in the timeline of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, this was the second dedicated Captain America story that would be presented. That genuinely continues to be the only thing relatively ill I have to say about the Winter Soldier. It is just a solid movie all around. Then we have Guardians of the Galaxy, also from 2014. I wonder how the MCU would have changed if Guardians of the Galaxy hadn't turned out to be the success it had, especially in the bigger get-togethers down the road at the end of Phase 3. Guardians of the Galaxy, as it stands, though, is the most neo-pop Indiana Jones adventure in space you ever did see. If you squint, this could very easily become a Star Wars Dr. Aphra movie, which would be amazing, Disney, please. And it might be that kind of interchangeably, or maybe a personal dissidence from the main character in Star-Lord that has never quite hit as hard for me as it did for everyone else. And don't get me wrong, the stuff that is unique and fun are the elements of the franchise that are continuing in the MCU to this day, mainly being Rocket and Groot. And the stuff I do not love, things like the finale and a few of those character things I mentioned earlier, I don't hate. Everything feels solid or above so. In the words of the great Dick Grayson, I am just entirely whelmed by Guardians of the Galaxy. 2015's Avengers Age of Ultron. Wow, we are really 10 years removed from back when this was released in theaters. Stepping back, I still feel largely the same about this movie, I feel. It was really, really fun. I would say the highs of Age of Ultron are higher than those of the first Avenger, but the lows are so much lower, it makes it that much harder to really want to get back to it, especially in the pacing. Listen, foreshadowing is great. I love it. It's usually a little more tactful, though, and doesn't bring the entire movie to a grinding halt like it does in Age of Ultron. The cast continues to really bounce off one another well. It is that dynamic of the core Avengers cast that really makes this as fun as it is. The introductions of Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch and Vision work really well within the world this franchise has built up. All that goes for Ultron too, as does the Pinocchio motif, which might be a little overplayed to many, but it doesn't mean it doesn't fucking work really well still. When you look at Age of Ultron against the backdrop of only what came before, it also continues to be a really great continuation of themes. The Maximoff siblings essentially have the backstory of Iron Man and Captain America combined, traumatized by Stark weapons and turned into super soldiers to fight for their country. It is a little bit laid out when Captain America states it that directly, but I still find it to be a very powerful and valid, even if everything around it struggles to hold itself together at times. Finally, 2015's Ant-Man. And I am continuously dumbfounded as to why the MCU caps their phases off like one movie after the big Avengers finale. Ant-Man does not work as some little postscript to this phase as much as it feels like the beginning of something new, you know? Because it's all about beginnings with comics' second man of the Ants, Scott Lang, getting out of prison and being almost immediately recruited to heist a super suit from its owner, then steal another super suit from this really big asshat after a fun little training montage. Paul Rudd really brings his specific and genuine vibe throughout the entire movie. You are really endeared to his character immediately after you see his interactions with his daughter. His balancing of being both doofy and a competent hunk set the tone for everything else to follow. And not that he is in the actual mix of a lot of action sequences, but the use of the use of the shrink mechanic is just inventive enough here to be interesting while leaving a lot open for future sequences. Ant-Man scales way back from world-destroying shenanigans to a slightly elevated heist. A heist in which the actions are actually world-destroying, I guess, but it's never actually framed as such. And it leaves you with a movie that feels light yet significant in the overall world that Marvel has been creating. I just wish this was the start of Phase 3 still. And before we get into introductions, let's quickly rank through everything. Let's see, at the bottom of our list here, we are definitely going to have Thor the Dark World. The weakest out of Phase 2 for me, and right above that is going to be probably Guardians of the Galaxy. Not that it's not bad, I just don't like it as much as the others. I think above that we're going to do... I think above that we're going to do All Hail the King, the one-shot, which is a good one-shot. I think it's a really fun one-shot. It just takes us a long time to get back to it. And above that, I think, is going Iron Man 3. My favorite of the Iron Mans, I believe. And above Iron Man 3, I think I'm going to put the one-shot Agent Carter one-shot. That was a really solid one-shot. Check it out. And above that, I think it's going to be Age of Ultron. Again, I like it. I like it a lot. I think the highs are a lot higher, but the lows are so much lower than the first Avengers that it doesn't go higher than this. Followed by that, it's going to be Ant-Man, and that leaves Captain America, the Winter Soldier. I don't think that's a big surprise to anybody, or even a controversial opinion that Captain America, the Winter Soldier is going to be at like the top of this list. But that is our sprint through Marvel's Phase 2, where heroes are tested, friendships are shaken, and there are just enough quips to fill a helicarrier. Next up, we're switching gears entirely. At the end of this month, I'll be covering Shark Week 2025 with some of the strangest shark facts the deep has to offer. After that, we're going back in time for Through My Eyes for a deep dive into Disney's package era of films. Until then, keep your armor charged, keep your mixtape handy, and your ants well trained.